Yes.
So, good evening and welcome to this evening's meeting of the Woodbury County Zoning Commission. Today's date is August 26, 2024. It is 5 p.m. Tonight's meeting will be audio taped and minutes will be prepared. In respect to all parties, we ask those present turn off their cell phones or set to vibrate. Those in attendance are asked to legibly complete the attendance sheet upon the front table. I would like to take a moment to review the procedures that the commission will follow tonight. First, the commission will handle the normal housekeeping agenda items, and for each application on the agenda, I will open the public hearing on the item. The planning and zoning staff will then present the staff report, including the staff recommendation. Any letters or other communication received from the public prior to the hearing will be entered into the record. The applicant will then have the opportunity to present his or her case and respond to staff report. Next, we will hear comments from the public. If you would like to speak either in support of or against the application, you must come to the microphone. Please first state your name and address for the record. All interested parties shall be heard, but repetitious comments should be avoided. Repetitious or irrelevant comments may be ruled out of order by the chair. I ask that you remain respectful and courteous with your comments at all times. Limit of 3 minutes for comments will be enforced. After all public comments have been heard, the staff and applicant may make a closing statement. The hearing shall then be closed by motion and vote. Thereafter, no further comments from the staff, public, or applicant may be heard unless asked for by the commission. The commission shall then deliberate the case and may ask questions of the applicant, the staff, or any party offering testimony. However, such questions do not reopen the hearing for additional comments from the public unless so requested or approved by the commission. The commission will then formulate and vote on a motion. Motion will typically either grant or deny the requested application. Any commission member who has an ex parte communication to place in the record of this meeting should do so prior to the beginning of the deliberation of the respective agenda item. That being said, the first item on the agenda is roll call. Let it be noted that Jeff is not here or Tom Bride. Public comments on matters not on the agenda, which is item number 3. Do we have any public comments? Anyone on the phone?
No.
Anyone out there? Okay, seeing no public comments. Not on the agenda, we'll move on to the approval of the minutes for July 22nd, 2024.
Motion to approve?
Okay, we have a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
We have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Okay, next item on the agenda is discussion of planning process for nuclear energy to be considered for addition to Woodbury County zoning ordinance. Dan, you want to read the information into the record, please?
Yes, tonight is simply an information item to kind of move us towards the goal of engaging the public through future public hearing process to understand how our property owners feel about nuclear as a potential item to associate with the Woodbury County zoning ordinance. The backup materials in the packet kind of address some generalized discussion about the Nuclear Regulatory Agency and some procedures that would have to go through at the federal level. This is an industry that is heavily regulated across the board. And so the question is, depending on how the property owners and folks feel around here in Woodbury County, there are some potential paths to looking at nuclear energy, including possibly associating it within the land use summary table of the ordinance. Section 3.03.4 technically does not have nuclear energy enumerated in there. But this discussion could be something of the nature of, do we add a line entry in there, make a conditional use permit available or an allowed use available, depending on the level of federal regulations. I oftentimes point to how we deal with the telecommunication towers, where we know there's a lot of regulation there from the federal and the state, but we have an entry there in the ordinance that allows for the county to have some involvement in that procedure. That may be one path to look at. The other thing is under section 3.03.3, there is an interpretation clause in there that if we were possibly to have an application for nuclear in the future, or at least a consideration for a project, there is probably a a pathway that a project like that could even happen right now, as far as doing the association under 3.03, where an application could possibly be brought forward under the conditional use permit. So I reflected on that in the packet scenario. So it just kind of comes down to what we want to set up for some public engagement. I did ask our emergency management coordinator, Michael Montino, who's with us here tonight, to talk to us about nuclear energy from the perspective of how it would affect, of course, their department, a very big part of that, as well as the possibility of the county looking at that from at least the zoning perspective. So I would probably say it'd be a good idea maybe to turn this over to Michael.
Do I have to talk to the microphone? Are
Yeah.
you recording?
Please.
Yeah.
Okay. What questions do you have? So I do the emergency management side, mostly work on the response planning. Nuclear is something that I studied pretty extensively at Georgetown. There's a couple of case studies involving nuclear disasters. They're few and far between. A lot of people are going to say that nuclear is a very efficient energy option. It's also cheap. It allows for quite a bit of energy to be produced very quickly and very cheaply, but I could go on for days on the details, so I figured I'd just open it up to questions for you guys and see what you want to know.
Details are. What, in your experience, what have you seen? What's out there?
So as far as nuclear reactors is what you're asking.
Mm-hmm.
They come,
You push the button on that first. Yeah.
it's got to be red.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Awesome. So there's a bunch of different types of reactors out there, all sorts of different types of technologies. Obviously, these are continuing to advance. They are getting smaller and you can have more of them. So historically speaking, what we saw is a lot of boiling water reactors, right? So basically everything all runs in one circuit. Same concept. Basically, you have a core of uranium-235 fissile material, and you send a neutron into it, and it causes a atom of uranium-235 to split. You get 3 additional neutrons and heat energy. That heat energy is then used to boil water, and those other neutrons continue to set off additional reactions. What they use in there is water to keep this cool, so that way those rods don't melt. And then they also use boron, which is also going to be in a basically tube. And what those are going to do is absorb the extra neutrons to prevent a runaway reaction, right? So we're controlling this one at a time, essentially not creating a nuclear explosion. But all of the technology is basically the same. Nowadays, we're seeing pressurized water reactors, same concept, but 2 circuits, right? So one is actually running through the core and running through the reactor, heating up. That continues to heat up another circuit of water, which runs through the turbines and then goes off as steam. Typically speaking, we see these reactor facilities co-located with a water source, either a lake, a river, an ocean, because of the fact that you have to keep the cores cool. Keeping the cores cool is incredibly important for safety. So what happens if you can't keep it cool, those cores become uncovered, say, for example, a power outage or a lack of water supply, which is always a concern. This is what we saw with the Fukushima Daiichi and Fukushima Daini plants in Japan after the earthquake. You start to see that water level lower, and those cores and the entire assembly starts to melt. You're not actually going to see one of these explode in a nuclear explosion. It doesn't work like that. But what does happen is that melting process creates hydrogen, which builds up at the top of the reactor, one ignition, and you see an explosion, which is what we saw. And what that does is that scatters all of the nuclear material. Unfortunately, with that, it causes concerns for human health, livestock, food. It contaminates basically everything. But what I do want to say is that those kinds of incidents are few and far between. And what we see a lot of the time actually is we see significant economic growth, cheap energy, and it's actually a pretty good thing. Except for me, because I have to do a lot of extra planning, but that's okay. That's what you hire me to do. So what we would have to do with that is we would create an emergency planning zone. So this is what we saw down in Omaha too with their reactor. Usually it extends about 50 miles. That's about it. So just know that if we bring that in, it is going to affect other counties. And again, I'm going all over the place here because I could talk about this for days, but I'm trying to give you the cliff notes.
Just some of the environmental things that I've seen, and maybe not strictly environmental, is we've had earthquakes.
Mhm.
Earthquakes have had an effect on this, even though there might be minor earthquakes.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's one. The amount of drought that we've had in this area, like, let's say that this should be located in the industrial zone and it's next to Missouri River, and the Missouri River, as levels are down, you know how much it fluctuates through the winter months
Mhm.
and how it's been, in the past few years. And then on the reverse side, we have the floods of 2011. I mean, how would this impact that industrial area and a nuclear facility?
So in a lot of ways, I want you to consider it the same way that it would the current Mid-America plant, or say, for example, CF Industries, right? Any one of those hazards can obviously impact those facilities. So they have planners that plan for them and have alternative options. The nice thing about the facilities that are there now, for the most part, if there's a problem, you hit the switch and turn it off, and it's now an inert problem, right? So you catch some water, you might cause some damage to the equipment, but at the end of the day, you're not going to cause widespread issues. But for whatever reason, like you're saying, hey, a low water event. Last year, we saw the Missouri River go lower than I think it ever has before, at least in its recorded history. We had about 4 feet of water at Port Neal, right? Which is incredibly low, actually to the point where it was below some of our industrial water intakes. So that for me is probably one of the biggest environmental concerns. The storms, earthquakes, we can build structures that withstand those. Floods, we can raise facilities above flood level. But what I can't do is, if water isn't there, somehow find water to continue to put back into it.
Mhm.
So that's probably the biggest concern out of all of them.
So I'm guessing the environmental research and studies that they do prior to even considering the development of something like this would take all of those things into consideration. Although I did see an article that said that they didn't, and they kind of glossed over some of that information and they got in trouble for it. I think there was a $35,000 fine for it.
Mhm.
But
And understandably, there's our local portion of it, but nuclear energy, just because of the way it is and the hazard that it could present, is very heavily federally regulated, right? So
Right.
a lot of those things, yeah, I'm a smart guy, but they're going to bring in a geological engineer to tell you about the water levels and what earthquake probabilities might be. And they're going to factor all that in before they even are able to come forward and say, we would like to do a project, right?
Right. And I think I found an article then that was about a facility that had been shut down. It was supposed to be shut down or dephased or defunct by the 2020.
Mhm.
And they've kept it open until the the wind came through and did so much damage that economically they decided that they were going to
Mhm.
repair it.
And a lot of these facilities are older, right?
Mhm.
We are seeing new facilities. We're seeing them show up all around the world because they are very efficient. However, we're seeing a lot of these older facilities, they're in place. So, example, just look at our Mid American plant. We can't take that away unless we put something there, right?
Mhm.
Because it's supplying the energy. And what we see is these old facilities that were constructed in the 60s and 70s continuing to get extended and extended and extended because there's no replacement for them. And if we were to just pull the plug simply or shut it down, we would probably put hundreds of thousands of people without power.
Right. And I think what they're ended up doing is decided not to reactivate the plant,
Mhm.
but put up solar panels instead. I
Mhm.
mean, thousands of acres of solar, I think 3,000 acres of solar panels.
Mhm.
So it just kind of seems to be Mercury. You know, we have certain issues and then we have more certain issues, but we do need the power. We got to figure out where the power is going to come
Mhm.
from. I get it.
And every solution, unfortunately, comes
Has
with its hosts of benefits and its hosts of
some
issues.
drawbacks.
The nice thing about nuclear, though, is you don't have to worry about the eminent domain part of it,
Mhm.
right? So you're not taking away vast areas of ag land or land that could be used for other uses. This is going to be something that's contained, however, would just require some additional planning. Well, I should say some, a lot of additional planning in order to keep the public safe.
All right. So if I'm not mistaken, you're in favor of nuclear energy in the area?
I can go either way, but
Okay.
for the most part, I'm going to go not on my opinion. I'm going to go on what the literature says,
Sure.
right? The people that are way smarter than I am,
Yeah,
most are going to say they're in favor of nuclear.
okay.
Omaha was the nearest. I believe they are currently in the process of decommissioning that nuclear power plant.
Any others that are,
I don't think we have any others that are close. I think Quad Cities has one, but that's far out of our jurisdiction. I'd have to pull a Google on that. I know when I was back in Chicago, we basically had them everywhere. Illinois has the most nuclear power plants of any state, so lots of planning with that when I was back there.
So in a lot of your safety meetings, I'm sure you go nationally to a lot of your safety meetings. Are you hearing more and more about nuclear power plants and their popularity or their use right now?
They're silent, which is a good thing when it comes to my kind of business. If there's a lot of chatter, chances are there's a problem somewhere. But as far as the safety issues, we don't see a lot. The last thing that we had in the United States was 3 Mile Island,
Right.
which we were able to rectify. And luckily, we stopped a lot of problems. Very few accidents, which they do happen at nuclear facilities, but there's so many safeguards that are put in place because of good planning that basically what you're doing is you're weaving, and I talk about this with planning all the time. Every safeguard is another layer of mesh. The more safeguards you have, the harder it is to penetrate the mesh. And what we've seen is, okay, maybe one safeguard fails. Someone forgot to flip on a switch or left a valve open or something. Well, there's so many other safeguards that we're going to prevent those problems from happening. But again, I never say never. You could always have an event like the tsunami that happened in Japan that
Mhm.
just knocks out all of the safeguards at the same time, and now you have a really big issue. Luckily, we don't have tsunamis here.
Yeah.
At least I don't think so, right?
If I may ask you a question
Sure.
about uh, it's an extensive federal process. I've talked to some of the folks, so even over at Mid-American, they've talked about they get an application, the idea versus concept, putting the idea into the thought process and going through those initial stages of permitting. This is a long haul
Yeah.
procedure for figuring out what all those aspects are. So if we had some type of infrastructure, whether it's a line item, a conditional use, they're gonna go through a very heavy lifting site selection, major process to the point that that application is turnkey before they bring it to the county. But they're gonna put you in a position
Mhm.
where, and the county as a whole, in a position where we have to react, where you're probably chasing some money for funding, increasing your department and all of those things like that. So if we were to put infrastructure in the ordinance that signals to the world that, okay, Woodbury can facilitate the nuclear, what kind of position does that put you in when you get the word that we might have an application, or where should we be in terms of emergency management as far as telling the world that we can have nuclear? And then you as head of your department, how do you have to work with the supervisors on that?
So for me, because it's so intensively federally regulated, there's also federal funding to help local agencies just like me that would have to continue to grow the program, put more planning and process, 2 more drills. Obviously, there's a different set of standards. However, and let me pause there. I have no problem doing that. I'm younger, as long as I continue to be treated well here, which I have been, supervisors and everybody else. I got 30 years, right? I'm here because you want me to be here. I want to be here. I have no problem doing the work. However, what I would caution you with is having a nuclear power plant here would affect a 50-mile radius at least around us. So there may be many other counties that now have to do this planning process or have extra things that they need to do, and they simply don't have the resources for it, and they're not reaping the economic benefits that we would. So there's an externality to every decision to be made. So just consider that as well.
Yeah. And I did reach out and contact the area counties and let them know that we're going through this process, and I've asked them of questions on how they might feel. But so if we have would that put you in any kind of position even without a project? If we had something in the ordinance where we could be nuclear at some point, or you have to kind of wait, engage the.
No, I don't think so. I don't want to say that in full because of unintended consequences. But as of right now, just having this discussion with you guys, I don't think there's any ramifications to me right off before we even start a planning process.
So basically then if we make it as most simple as possible and just put an entry in there and say nuclear energy, conditional use, general industrial, do you see any consequences to that, to your department or to the county?
I don't think so. Right now, has anybody actually expressed interest in a project?
No, not directly. I had a meeting to kind of explain to Mid-American kind of what's going on generally with this debate. Of course, them being one of the major stakeholders, but I haven't heard any, direct like, yay, we want a project, we want to bring a project here.
Mhm.
This whole debate, when we got the direction with from the Board of Supervisors, were to we've looked at all these different energy options over the last several years. We've looked at solar last year. The wind issue has definitely been a part of it. I remember Supervisor Raddick kind of pointing out we've explored these other options. Maybe now's the time to look at nuclear as a
Mhm.
potential option. Of course, the public made their views very well known about the solar as well as the wind in a lot of respects. And so based on the limitations of where solar is pretty much down in the industrial area, and from that, the question is maybe nuclear being a potential menu of options where the energy industry could see, okay, maybe solar may not be the greatest option as far as out on ag land, but maybe nuclear could possibly be an option. So this is kind of about economic development in the sense that do we want to engage the public and ask them, is Woodbury County open for business or not, as far as the nuclear aspect of it? So it's kind of exploratory in nature.
Mhm.
And so I'm just trying to get to the root in my research on, is this something because of the magnitude of the overlifting at the federal level, down at the here at the county level? Will we have assurances from what the federal is doing that our public, our populace will be they'll be heavily regulated from that and be protected from
Mhm.
federal setbacks and other types of regulations?
And I think by expressing the language as it would be a conditional use is essentially you're walking into the room with a bunch of people asking to start a discussion. You can always say no and move on later on. Part of that is I can't even guarantee, given our current situation here, that they would want to continue to proceed with a project the way the water levels have been going. And maybe there's some new technology that's either here or maybe developed in the next 5 years where they might say, hey, we really want to try this in Woodbury County. But I don't think there's any harm in starting the conversation. And ultimately, we have all of these options available to us, and we will have to do something sometime in the future with coal, right? So I think giving every single option available to our citizens is highly advantageous to you guys as a group.
Questions? Experiences? Anything?
No other questions right now?
Mike, you said things are getting smaller.
Mhm.
The processes, how big of an area are you talking about when you say smaller?
Smaller than what's out there right now,
Yeah.
but not being an engineer, I wouldn't be able to tell you.
Okay.
That's just my honest answer.
Yeah.
It sounded like there's 3 different sizes available or in use right now. And there's like a micro something. And then of course bigger and bigger and bigger. But yeah, I need more research, I guess, on our information on that too. So
Mhm.
hopefully that'll come up in our research.
And as far as things are concerned from my side, and from the safety and environmental side, a nuclear reactor is a nuclear reactor, right? Um, you're going to buy a boat one way or another. Do you want the 10-foot boat or you want the 25-foot boat, right? So ultimately, depending on the engineering specs, it might just be getting down to that discussion. How much bang per buck do we want?
And it's one of those things, I'm talking with Sam Wagner over at Mid-American. I understand kind of years ago, Mid-American put out some type of request for proposal around 2010, maybe later than that, a few years later, because they kind of explored it for a little bit and then kind of backed off a bit. Well, the county would have been in a position at that time if they were looking at maybe locating here or locating Monona or we'll just say Woodbury, for example. At that time, if a project was probably brought to the county and we have that electrical energy generation, various other interpretations under utilities in the ordinance, it's my understanding what they go through at the siting at the federal level. They likely come to the zoning office, and that's where we would be in the position of that interpretation there on 3.03. So the zoning director basically can say, okay, you need to run this through a conditional use and then basically bring it there. So I want to make it real clear that this discussion is very much so about taking that out of the zoning director's hands and making sure that we have a process that goes in through likely the conditional use. And I've had folks tell me because of that level of federal regulation, the county could decide allowed use, general industrial, just because of the fact that so much regulation, the energy company can start working together with the feds to locate that there. But the conditional use does give us that voice as far as the siting and placing it there. So I think looking at the direction we received, this is an exploratory effort to see how where the public kind of falls through the public hearing process. But I think if one happened tomorrow, we would probably likely lead it to the zoning commission and to the board of adjustment automatically. But in a way, this is a lot of housekeeping and procedure and clarity so that our population has an expectation of us as a county to have some kind of tab on it for sure.
Right.
And kind of with that said, if we could just kind of segue a little bit, there is going to be expectation of us to have public hearings on it or a public hearing, depending how the research goes. And I would probably suggest maybe at one point we go out in the field somewhere, maybe do like I'd maybe say a Salix location to hold the zoning commission meeting there and kind of engage the public down in that area. So generally, we have a lot on the plate, as you see with the process, or even with the agenda tonight. I got a couple briefings for you there on wind energy and lots of other things there. So we just kind of got to look at the schedule and see when the commission, I know the supervisors expect us to definitely be on this respective issue. But my concern always this time of year is we're getting really close into harvest. And we want to respect the property owners out there who are definitely going to be in the fields.
Right.
And so we got to kind of lay that out and maybe do a work session or do some public hearings to collect some information. So we're coming up on harvest pretty quick, but we could maybe likely get at least a public hearing in September if we wanted to do a field trip down to Salix. That's definitely on the table, possible options. So.
Okay. Do we need to make that decision right now, or do we go through the other items? Well, being we're gonna be losing somebody.
Yeah.
You're leaving
I
early?
bought myself 15 more minutes.
15 more minutes? Okay.
I think, Chris is chair, we could probably talk about the scheduling of that, because you set the agenda as far as
Right.
that.
Oh, I'd like to have my commissioners' participation though, too. I want to make sure they're going to be there.
It's essential we have all five. Yes.
Essential. You heard that.
Essential.
Essential. What's everybody's schedule look like in January or September?
Yeah, so we got to be mindful of harvest and
Right,
everything in the
right.
schedule. So everybody is aware. And so we can kind of leave it at that.
Okay. Sounds like a plan. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for putting the consideration into this. And as you guys know, this is not one of those projects where you give the thumbs up and next year the solar panels are out. This could potentially be a 30-year or longer project. You guys won't be on this commission when it eventually comes into fruition, probably, and I might not even be here either. So having these discussions are going to be very impactful for the people that live here in the future. So I want to thank you for having these deep discussions now.
Thank you.
Did I push the button now?
Okay, so should we move on to the
Move
next?
on to the next one.
Next item, information discussion about the Board of Supervisors' consideration of changes to the commercial wind energy conversion systems. Okay, Dan, tell us what's going on.
Okay. We've had a lot of discussion over the last several years about wind energy generation systems in Woodbury County. And the public has been very active on engaging. I'll give an example of the Lawton Town Hall that was held on April 17th, 2024. It was a very active meeting where we learned a lot across the board about our property owners' concerns about safety and the regulatory framework for these respective wind energy systems. And so the Lawton, as well as the county fair, there was a petition that was signed. And the petition was later delivered to the County Board of Supervisors. And the county board, anytime you receive a petition, it's imperative that the petition is looked into, researched, taken very seriously. And so staff, of course, had received direction from the supervisors because of all of the vast information. Not to mention, there's been other information discovered about wind energy in other jurisdictions. As far as safety data sheets and information that talk about further specifications and distances that are out there where we could consider for protection from property lines. And so, as you know, a few years ago when this original ordinance was put into place, it was a home rule standalone ordinance that was directly passed by the board. So it's not actually included in the Iowa code parameters of county zoning. And so this isn't subject to the zoning commission's statutory requirement to offer a recommendation. So that's why this recent direction that's alluded to in the packet went directly to staff to look at that. But I think it's very imperative, even though there's not a statute in there where the commission takes action, that you're fully briefed on what it is as far as what the supervisors are looking at. And right now, there's some language that's being kind of reviewed inside of the county attorney's office to expand the respective setbacks in terms of there will be setbacks continuing for the residences. And you might remember that the occupied residence setback was adjusted to 2,500 feet several years ago. And so these new setbacks are we're looking at property lines, kind of extending out participating property lines. We're also going to be looking at the decommissioning language and the bonds and the finances that go into there. We're also going to be looking at the setback on having a setback waiver, I should say. There's language in there. I'm pulling back a waiver on the setback. They're looking at introducing a minimum. I think it's around 1,600 in there somewhere, based upon these safety manuals that are out there. And what's been interesting is I believe it's Ohio, this jurisdiction, I'd have to double check. I think it was Ohio. And they went through a kind of like their version of the utilities board, going through that process for the data sheets and everything were specified. Anytime you have a specification of any kind of system that tells you directly how that system fits within a particular area, that's essential data in terms of looking at how it can fit within the area. So I think the recent data that the county has available to them as far as data sheets on these systems are very helpful to showing the public that, hey, we've got to be really cognizant and care about these respective distances. And so, yes, we're looking at expanding out the setback distance. I don't have the data and figures right in front of me, but is it 3,000 or 280? Yeah, 3,280 from property lines is what would be considered as far as what we're looking at in the safety data sheet models from the respective property line. And when we introduce the full out language in the next several days, you will see that data and how it plays off of the setbacks within the respective project area. So there's a distinguishing factor between a participating landowner and a non-participating landowner. So the setbacks will kind of recognize the difference between the two. And so there's kind of a different relationship as far as inside of that project area. So you got to look at both the residence setback as well as the property line setback on what's coming out within the proposal. But we've seen within the safety data sheets that there's various concerns about items such as thunderstorms and lightning and the effects of safety of the population within those respective zones. There's also fire that is taken into consideration. So there's definitely measures, and again, it's the county's duty to protect the public health, safety, and welfare across the board. So each of these items are definitely in light of the new information that we have available to us, looking at trying to find a reasonable level of setbacks that are conscientious of the impact and the effects of these systems based upon relevant data sheets and information. So we look forward to bringing that forward to discuss with the public, have a set of public hearings. So staff is working to shore up the language so that we can, of course, optimally have it available. We'll definitely let you know when we have the direct text. And also the supervisors will have that set of 3 public hearings because that's what it takes to adjust county legislation. So we hope there'll be a good, robust debate and a clarity on what the expectations are. But I will say we've got good concrete sources that demonstrate things that the public and us and everybody should take very seriously and consider on this respective issue. And the teacher side of me looks at this whole representative democracy and the whole grassroots effort. This is the public. The public has been very clear and adamant through a series of meetings on bringing this to the attention. And you can't get more pure than a petition coming and asking for an examination of that. And so, again, more information to come. I wish I had the full layout of everything, but that's kind of a preview as far as the setbacks and those language. But the data sheets and everything do highlight the importance of protecting the the properties and the property owners and distinguishing non or participating and non-participating. So any questions at all?
Do we have any public that has any comments or anything they want to add? Seeing none, but I just wanted to throw it out there.
Sure.
No one on the phone. Okay. Commissioners, any questions or comments?
No.
At this time? Okay, I'm seeing none.
Okay,
I think that means we get to move on to the next item on the agenda.
next item. Yes. This is a follow-up on what we talked about on whether the county or even the zoning commission would want to even entertain or explore home occupation signs, whether there's a demand to proceed with any potential changes to the county sign regulation. Of course, it's clear there hasn't been really a huge demand. It just kind of popped up. Page 39 of your packet kind of clarifies what Chairperson Zelmer Zant even mentioned last month as far as the level of Woodbury County's sign size as far as home occupation does appear quite generous, I think was your words last month, as far as the 25 square feet. You'll see a few Butler County had 32, but there's nothing that exceeded hardly that or went up into the 50s or even the hundreds. And so that's just generally the update. I generally probably don't see any further action depending on if you do, I guess. So
Even Jeff's input about the city was even smaller.
yeah, like 2 or 3 square
Yeah.
feet.
Very
Yeah.
small.
Yeah, the home occupation is meant to retain as much of the residential aspects of the neighborhood while still allowing for economic, the ability to generate income and economic gain from your property. But as far as statewide in these counties, I think we had around 25 or so there on that list that we kind of went through. You're not seeing any thing just glare out at us that we're so far different than everybody else. So that's really all I got.
Okay.
Can I ask a question about that? So we did have that individual that exceeds,
Mhm.
what's the steps for that?
Well-
Is there steps?
Well, staff would have to administratively look at that issue on the merits of the case in front of it. This issue was, for full transparency, gave the individual an opportunity to come petition the board. It was kind of referenced if there's some major grassroots effort or if we identify a major need from the entire population coming forward. If we had a room filled with 45 individuals that had a petition that were looking for a change, I think that might, open up the ability to make zoning-based changes. So that was kind of presented to the individual that if you can convince any board, we're all ears and can definitely listen and consider. But based on what we had received and at that point and what we kind of looked into, I think we just kind of arrived to where we're at now, just kind of naturally. So.
Okay, that takes care of that. Yes? Okay, item number 6, public comments on matters not on the agenda. Again, we have no new faces in the audience and no one on the phone, so I think we can pass on that one as well. Staff update?
Yes, I do have a staff update. It will be short. I left a sheet up here for everybody. This is actually the Board of Supervisors agenda request form, which is usually backup material in the supervisor proceedings. And technically, this isn't official yet because the board meets tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. And there's an agenda item up here that Supervisors Taylor and Nelson put up on the procedure. And I just want to read out for the record, it's an executive summary. Again, this isn't direction until they make a decision on it. But I think because we meet once a month, it's imperative that there's some awareness to this. And so I'm just going to read out the executive summary. It said, when something as powerful as eminent domain is used and emplacement of new carbon pipeline is completed, a key question must be asked. After these new technologies have reaped and benefit of federal tax credits and the subsidiary energy used, what is to become of the land? This something that we have engaged in dozens of times regarding the alternative energies of wind and solar. Woodbury County adopted at our urging an energy resolution and has urged officials to look at new technologies that do not degrade farmland for future generations, respect private property rights, and leave the land in the spirit of stewardship better than we found out. If Summit plan to expand carbon pipeline through 300 miles that were abandoned by Navigator's CO2 pipeline, maintains Iowa Utilities Board Commission approval by approvals in South and North Dakota, and survives any lawsuit if parties so file, then it is incumbent upon us to ask a question: what decommissioning will be required to leave the land as outside companies found it? While publicly elected officials, to include 7 other counties, have appropriately focused mainly on setback distances and the use of eminent domain, this approach has an integral and reasonable, if then measure, to protect our land for future generations. And of course, there's a significant background written, but they're going to look at entertaining the motion, potential motion for direction of planning and zoning director to work with the zoning commission and the Board of Adjustment and legal counsel in order to make a recommendation contemplating decommissioning requirements as part of a new ordinance regarding carbon pipelines. Again, that's tomorrow night, and I'll definitely relay further information, but I fully encourage you to monitor the proceedings tomorrow night as well. So that may be part of our work ahead as well. So
Busy schedule coming up. Okay, thank you very much. All right, staff, are you done with your updates?
no, I promise. You voted on the Bitcoin measures last month as the recommendation over to the Board of Adjustment. The Board of Adjustment did meet, and the Board of Adjustment did take their prerogative to hold the application over for the month. They have up to 35 days to make a decision. And basically, they sent staff back to ask them further questions as far as the criteria. And we broke the questions down into further specifics as far as the design of the system, how much noise, decibels, things like that were generated, and kind of the questions that are kind of geared toward the impact of the neighborhood, specifically in terms of distances. And so we really felt we have a pretty rigorous level of questions that are going into the consideration. So the Board of Adjustments meeting is actually going to be on the Wednesday because of the Labor Day holiday. So we expect to have a robust public hearing. We hope the public is engaged on it for sure, so that we can learn as much as possible. Staff is waiting to receive the applicant's response to the further questions. That'll definitely go into a packet and be public information. We had received an additional letter. We didn't have a written statement up until just a few days ago from one of the neighbors that offered their level of opposition to the respective project. But anybody that wishes to comment in anticipation for any public hearing, we're always looking for comments. So with that said, we'll have to see how things go, and I'll update you further.
Thank you.
Question on that. So you talk about robust questions for them.
Yeah.
As I mentioned last meeting, all of these items that take farmland, there has to be some consistency. Is there decommission plans for something like that? Like everyone's so concerned about these other things?
Yeah, it can be built into any commission, any type of recommendation, and
They
I
have the
think
power to do that.
they would have the power to do situations like that. I think we can definitely, if you see a need arise out of any conditional use, out of any condition, I think we don't say this enough, but conditional use permits do have the force of an ordinance. They
Mhm.
are
They're
the
powerful.
determination
Yeah.
that comes out of both bodies. Both bodies can decide if something does require some type of an agreement. And if there is some type of agreement, I don't see why not, that something can be put into place. I think, of course, it would take attorney review, county attorney review if something goes to the level of an agreement scenario. But yeah, I think that there's definitely chances for things like that on future projects as a whole. So.
Good. Good. Now, staff, are you done?
Yes.
Okay. Just making sure. Okay, commissioners and comments or inquiries. Item number 8 on the agenda. Anything? Not hearing anything. All right, how about a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, same sign.
Thank you
We
for
are
coming, staff.
adjourned, folks.
Recordings